Buenos días a todos, bienvenidos en el tercer día del 4 Years From Now. Ahora es el turno del panel de debate, de preguntas, organizado por el Barcelona Health Hub, ¿de acuerdo? Donde tenemos pues, a tres de las farmacéuticas más importantes y últimamente pues, famosas, ¿no? Por culpa de lo que está pasando en la pandemia, como puede ser AstraZeneca, cuyo representante es el Innovation Strategy and Experience Lead, Jorge Pou, Novartis, con Cesar Velasco, el Head of Customer Solutions, y por parte de Angelini Pharma tenemos a Gemma Malla, Digital Medicines Head de Iberia, ¿de acuerdo? La moderadora, en este caso, embajadora del Barcelona Health Hub, es Francesca Wuttke, así que os dejo con ellos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, great. Well, thank you for joining us this morning. It's really my pleasure to moderate this very expert panel and talk about a little bit about how digital health startups can impact pharma. Maybe we'll start with a quick round of introductions because I was most impressed by how diverse everyone's background was, and I think it would help give a little bit of context to our talk. So Jorge, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you, Francesca. Yes, I'm Jorge Pou. I'm a Strategy, Innovation and Experience Lead at AstraZeneca. I joined the company during 2021, and my previous background was Telefónica. Actually, I have a lot of good friends and former colleagues over there at the stand of Wayra. I developed my career always around digital services and innovation, actually. Yeah.
Hello everyone, this is Gemma. I'm currently in Angelini Pharma. For those who don't know us, we are a company focused in brain health at European level in the what's so-called the next worldwide pandemic we will live. Because for those who don't know it, there were more adolescents who died from suicide than from COVID in Spain this year, so we're trying to work a bit on that. And I'm the lead for digital at Iberia level, but in the past I was not in pharma sector either. I was in Deloitte Digital, leading companies in digital transformation, specialized in pharma sector, but also in other sectors such as banking or retail. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Same here. Pleasure to be here today. I'm Cesar Velasco, medical doctor by training, background mostly in the public health sector, now working in Novartis as part of the startup, investors, innovation, reimagining medicine ecosystem, and happy to be here to share impressions and, well, these ecosystem questions that we need to raise in order to find the good answers.
Excellent. And lastly, I'm Francesca Wuttke. In addition to being an ambassador for the Barcelona Health Hub, I was formerly the Chief Digital Officer at Admiral, where I was responsible for the end-to-end digital transformation of the company, as well as for the creation of the Digital Garden, which is our digital health startup accelerator, where we brought startups in and shared some of those learnings with our internal team members. I'm currently the founder and CEO of NEN, which is a digital therapeutics platform that's bringing pain management to preschool kids with cancer. So again, pleasure to have you all here. And maybe Jorge, I'll start with you. You know, what is the role that startups can have in digital transformation in pharma?
Yeah, well, I think the role startups can have in digital transformation is huge because basically we can do this digital transformation alone. We believe this is an industry that is already in a path towards transformation, but we need new points of view. We were talking about the different backgrounds that we have here, but also new technologies, new ways of working, new approaches, and this is something that I believe can't be done within the industry. I think this is something wider that needs to be open and that we need to embrace the ecosystem to basically find new ideas and ways of transforming ourselves.
Excellent, thank you. And Gemma, tell us a little bit about some of the opportunities and the benefits of working with pharma within the context, working with startups within the context of pharma.
I think building on to what Jorge was mentioning, I think pharma, we've been a bit endogamic if we really have to be critical. We've been really looking into ourselves, and I think it's not trivial that for three different companies, the three digital roles, we are not coming from the industry. We need to be more open. in order to innovate, to understand what's the next big step in terms of digital transformation. We are super innovative sector, but we were a bit behind in digital. And I think here it's where startups can play a huge role, because sometimes it seems that we as persons go into Amazon, we go into our smartphone, but then suddenly when it comes to health, when it comes to doctors, that doesn't happen, right? We go back to analogical world, and that's not real. Like doctors, patients are also digital persons, and I think startups can help us. We cannot do that alone because we're a bit endogamic, and we need to partner up with that ecosystem in order to really open our eyes and make the next move.
I think that's a really great point. The idea of patients and doctors as consumers and ingesting information and disseminating information in the way that we all do as people every day, I think is a really important one. Cesar, what has your experience been in terms of the different technologies that have been utilized within Novartis that have created that kind of change of chip within the team members?
So that's a very good question, and I would start this question with another question, which is, all of you as patients, what would you expect from us as an ecosystem in terms of technologies, as you were asking, in terms of startups, in terms of innovation? And I would say, first of all, we as a patient, me as a patient, I would expect all of us work together in order to not to put an on top of a nice to have solution on the market, but to bring significant transformation that really brings more value. And this is why I would say, and we will talk about a specific technology, but we need to put the focus on the needs of the patients, on the need of the healthcare ecosystem, and not go for the brightest ideas or for the more, for the sharpest presentations. We need first to look onto the needs of the healthcare system, then go to several startups with different solutions for the same need, pivot test, and then buy the one that brings the technology that is more suitable for the need. So there are several technologies that we like, and there are not so many that really solve the problem that the patients have right now.
I think that's a really key point within pharma is starting with the solution. So I would tell my team over and over again to always ask of the other teams what's keeping them up at night, because it's not about throwing cool tech at a problem. It's about solving for a real problem that patients and providers and healthcare systems have. So I think that's really an
And if I may,
point.
Francesca, just to emphasize what Cesar was saying, I think patients expect us, like they don't know where pharma starts, startup ends, regulation, where hospital goes in. They expect us to work seamless. And I think here is also where Barcelona Health Hub is doing a great job in like trying to gather us all to understand that we need to work together and to make it more smooth, because sometimes that works a bit more in silos than what our patients really need.
In fact, that's a good point. How many of you are working on a startup? And how many of you are working in pharma right now? So I would challenge you today for the ones who are working in startups, look for the needs. Don't look for the buyer. Look, like today, you need to pivot test the need that you're covering. And the ones that are working on pharma, don't look for the startup and don't look for the solution. Think on the need that we are trying to cover, pivot test the need that we try to cover, and then talk to startups that might cover this need. And if we change this mindset, next year when we come back here, if Francesca invites us again, I think that we will have done a significant journey in 1 year if we really change this mindset.
No, absolutely. Actually, I think this is a critical point because innovation cannot be technology-oriented. It needs to be patient-oriented. It's always about what are the pain points that we want to solve, what are the pain points that we want to address, and then afterwards we will find the best technology, the best startup to find and solve the problem that we want to solve. So
exactly,
that's critical.
Yeah.
And Gemma, you were mentioning the Barcelona Health Hub as kind of the glue. Sorry, it's an announcement. The glue that is bringing together investors, entrepreneurs, pharma, health insurance providers, and medical centers. What do you think is different about the Barcelona ecosystem or the Spanish ecosystem compared to maybe broadly across Europe or globally across the world? Because when I was a venture capital investor in digital health, I found the companies from Spain to be incredibly scrappy. And I mean that in the most positive way. they tend not to have the most funding with the fanciest investors, but they are getting much more done at valuations that are unfortunately much lower than those of the US or of other parts of the world, but really incredible work that's being done. So maybe you can share a little bit about your experience.
Yeah, I'm gonna go for Barcelona, and I leave my colleagues to share the Spanish view. For me, I think we are so lucky to be here, to be in one of the centers of the eco centers of the world in terms of digital health, in terms of startups, not in digital but in other fields, and you can feel that there's startups emerging everywhere. And we are close to there. It's not like you're trying to speak to someone who is in Australia developing something. They are right around the corner, and Barcelona Health Hub is doing a great job in gathering them all and trying to connect us with us. Because in the end, I think Pharma, we can be the bridge for them, right? We have the investments somehow, and we know that we have the knowledge in the industry, and we can give them the hand to take a step further. So I think in terms of Barcelona, we are very lucky.
I agree, absolutely. And then outside of Barcelona, speaking more broadly of Spain, any thoughts, Jorge?
Yeah, well, I think that actually the Spanish ecosystem, if we go wider than health, is vibrant. We know about the 12 unicorns we have currently, all the records in investment we are achieving, etc. So the ecosystem, the entrepreneurial ecosystem is great, and I think this is a great moment for startups here in Spain, and healthcare is a priority. We're seeing that public administrations are putting the focus as well on healthcare transformation, and we are having new funds all from the national government, also from the European funds, and then we are seeing that there are tons of startups. We have records in the volume of startups, maybe not yet in terms of investment, but I think the moment is now, and that we are going to see a lot of growth around healthcare startups in Spain. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think last year marked the first year where we really saw a transition from very early stage investment, seed, pre-seed, Series A, to much more growth stage investing in Spain. So a lot more B and C rounds that were of much more sizable amounts, and also from capturing the attention of many more international investors as well. So in terms of the key stakeholders that you all see from the perspective of introducing digital transformation within Pharma, who would you say are the biggest players?
So I would say we are in a really rich ecosystem in Spain, as my mates were saying. Of course, we have good polls for like startup generation, and for that we recognize 2-3 cities in Spain. Of course, Barcelona is maybe the hub of all those, but Madrid, Valencia, others are generating startups. I would say there is also a really interesting point, which is that we have several healthcare regions really defining what are the needs and, well, jumping to the innovation ecosystem with specific calls, with also innovation purchasing from the public administration. And in this level, we have several regions really like breaking ice, like could be Galicia, Madrid, Andalucía, Canary Islands, Valencia, with insomnia that you already know, and they are also here. So there are several healthcare communities going for that, and this is why also we could do the investment. Many pharmas, other investors are also growing up their capabilities in order to either develop or pilot testing in several hospitals or primary healthcare centers their solutions. In our case, we brought Biome, and we were lucky because we only have a Biome hub in 11 countries in the world, which means that we are in Spain in one of the top countries in terms of solutions generations and scaling up to other countries. And well, I would say that this is, at least for us, a good measure, pressure testing on how the maturity of the ecosystem in terms of how we can apply solutions from startups to real to the healthcare system here in Spain. So.
And Jorge, can you tell us a little bit about what the requirements from a startup are in terms of interacting with Pharma? So, for example, in my past, I worked with some startups that were able to solve for the problems that Cesar was mentioning, but they didn't have the scale or scope to really fit our needs and grow with us in the way that we thought. What are some of the key criteria that you would need to see in a startup before partnering?
Yeah, I would say that certain maturity and flexibility to adapt to the constant co-creation. Because building on what Cesar was mentioning, in my opinion, there is also some key players that are patients and HCPs. And I think you will all agree with me that co-creation, constant co-creation and fine-tuning of services is really, really important. And that, okay, we don't have all the answers, so basically once you start piloting something, you know that you are going to fine-tune and redesign the service. So basically, it's important that once we partner with a certain startup or a certain solution to address a pain point, we need some flexibility and to be able to adapt to these changes in the service once we see how to implement it in a hospital or in the pathway system, etc.
And does the funding of the startup come into account? Because having seen a lot of startups start and fail before projects terminate, is that also a criteria? Do you check to make sure that they're sufficiently funded, that they can get at least through, in terms of their runway, the length of the project you're looking to collaborate on?
When we think that a startup has a good idea and we think that it has potential, we have a network of hubs called A Catalyst Network. We don't invest in startups through this network, but what we do is to open and to join different stakeholders in the ecosystem. So basically, for example, we have more than 20 hubs around the globe, and many of these hubs are partnering with some funds and with some investors. So basically what we try to do is to put them in contact to make sure that they will not be lacking this kind of funds and that we are not going to miss an opportunity of scaling a solution for these kind of problems. Yeah.
That's great. Gemma, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, if I may, because I think the points that are coming are super interesting, but I would also like to point out that we as Pharma have so many ways to collaborate with startups that it's not only incubating them. Because I think sometimes we narrow it down to that, like either you incubate 3 startups or you're not leading digital transformation. And that sometimes is frustrating for startups and for us, because we have different rhythms. Like when you put them into our DNA, they are super speed up, have this super agile process, and sometimes we as a sector have different dynamics. So sometimes into that relationship might come up frustrations or not the output that we all expect. So I think incubating them is a way, but we have so many other ways in which we can collaborate with all the startups that we have here in the 4 years from now today, and that we can embed them more in our DNA, in the way we operate as pharma companies. And I would say that we need to keep our minds open, and there's so many ways we can give our hand to them.
I fully agree with that, and I think that brings me to, when we had our little chat before the panel, there was a question raised that I thought was controversial and really interesting, and I'd like to hear all of your perspective on it, and maybe Gemma, you can start, because I think it dovetails quite nicely with what you just said. What do you think Pharma's responsibility is in terms of dealing with startups and helping startups to grow?
I think I would start with something very easy that I think we all can do, right? Because we are usually, and the bigger we are in size as a company, we tend to work with the bigger companies also as our partners, as our providers, because probably that's easier. It's our dynamics. What if you change any agency, any company that you work in a daily basis for a startup? Like, you might give them so much business, you might embed in your DNA so many different ideas, so many different profiles, and that's richness already, So and that's so easy, but sometimes we make it so big. Either we incubate them or we don't do anything with them, and that's not fair. Just to put an example, we are working with a startup that is member of Barcelona Health Hub, and to bill us, they asked to bill us in sprints, because they work in sprints, that it's agile methodology, and we're like, no, we bill in 60 days. And, it's stupid things, but even that, when you work with them, you change your DNA somehow.
Completely, and another example from the pharma world, when we started working with startups at Admiral, we ended up partnering with about 27 startups over the 3 years. We actually talked to legal and procurement because we realized you can't give a startup a 400-page contract because they don't have the time to go through it, they don't have the money to pay for lawyers to go through it, and it's just taking away from their bandwidth. So we made a very, very streamlined contracting process, both from a legal and a procurement perspective, so that it was just enough, with the caveat that you don't need to have 50 pages of reps and warrants for a company that's not likely to be around over the next 5 to 10 years. We hope they are, but the likelihood is not high. So let's be reasonable and pragmatic about the way that we're contracting with startups to make us as pharma much more startup friendly.
Yeah, I think that startup mindset need also to enter the pharma industry. This is something that we are trying, and I know it's hard, but I guess also talent need to be also more flexible, and we need to adopt talent from startups and from the healthcare ecosystem, and also export talent so we can also share those learnings from different sectors. And I would say really aligned with what you said, we cannot work with startups as if they were providers. They are not consultancy firms, they are not providers, they are partners. And we need to align towards the needs of the healthcare system, as I said. Here I see people from EIT Health, I also see people from FIMTI, I see Ingrid here. So we really need to change the way we work as pharma, put ourselves close to those kind of initiatives, challenging the ecosystem with the needs, defining the needs with the ecosystems together with the startups and with us, and then looking for solutions. And this is something that we need to change in order to serve the startup sector in a more useful way and bringing them the real market. If not, we might be giving them like short-term solutions, boosting their, like seeding them, but then not giving them enough market to grow in the future.
And I've seen that happen a lot of times. We work with startups and we don't ask all the right questions from the beginning. So this particular startup may not be solving for the problem that we ultimately have, and it may cause them to pivot their business model in a way that doesn't benefit them in the future.
And we don't pivot the solutions, as Jorge was saying that. We sometimes we're not flexible with the solutions. We fall in love with the solution, and then we are lost.
That's the risk of being technology oriented, because it's like a wow effect, but what is the pain point that technology is solving, right?
And here probably it's what we were saying at the beginning, that it's so important like to work with patients, with patient associations, with HCP, with startups, like to triangulate that, and that happens smoothly, because it's whatever patient or person would expect us. Like that if it has value, it can go to the market, and it's not broken because I don't know who, like the regulation, or there was a stop in I don't know which hospital, it could not be tried. So.
And Jorge, you mentioned technology. What do you see as the next wave of technology? For example, I see digital therapeutics as the fourth modality of treatment. You have small molecules, you have biologics, cell and gene therapy, and then digital therapeutics. What do you see as the next biggest thing? Several years ago, everyone was talking about blockchain. It kind of died away as we couldn't find the right use cases within pharma, although I still think there's an opportunity there. But what's your take? I'll ask each one of you so you're prepared for an answer.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you. Now, in terms of technology, I think it's not a super new technology, but and from my background that I come from the Internet of Things and big data company of Telefonica, I think that the joining both Internet of Things and big data is huge, and that if we are able to put sensors in many things and convert them into smart things, and we are able to process that data always complying with anonymization, etc., and securitization. But if we are able to process that data and generate value, I think that there's something that could be exponential, and that could be a change of paradigm. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. There was an example, I think, that speaks exactly to that. It was a Dutch older folks home that was completely fitted out kitted out with Internet of Things and sensors and monitors all over. So as the patient walked in, their blood pressure was taken, their heart rate was taken, their respiratory rate was taken. The floor had sensors in case there was a fall. Even, this is a little bit inappropriate, but even the lavatories were set up to make sure that the patients weren't dehydrating. They measured the amounts of urine. They were able to give this information back to the doctor, and they were really much better controlled and were able to live far more independently because of all the advantages that technology was able to offer them.
I'm sorry, but I would go for IoT too and devices, because I think here it's also a bit controversial where pharma or technology companies, who has that more legitimate to play in that space, because we're all wearing so many devices already that are giving us a lot of data about our health. If we stress that a bit more, we can work on that prevention that we were saying the fit before, right? And there's so much room to play on that. The only question for me is how much our regulation within pharma will allow us to move in, or if it's going to be a more smoother way for, I don't know, the Apples or the Amazons of the world. But I'm sure the future of health is around IoT and devices, and that's going to be, it's already being the super wave, but it will keep being.
And then I think the question is, what's a consumer grade device and what's a medical grade device? And do we necessarily need a medical grade device to extract the data that you're talking about?
Well, I guess the healthcare system knowledge will pave the way for us and put the good ones on the way. So how many of you are in Mobile World Congress today for the first time? So this is your first day this year for all of you? Okay, so I would say with all the digital solutions that we have ahead for the healthcare system, and I agree with the IoT, there are several good initiatives, especially for tracking patients, that you will like. I would say artificial intelligence solutions. There are several good voice recognition initiatives, some of them developing business models with open source artificial intelligence that I recommend you. There are also really good virtual diagnostics, especially for visual impairment. There is one that I liked very much yesterday, but there are others for diagnostics and for rehabilitation. Really good experiences, and this sector I think is going to raise up. There are a few virtual reality metaverse that I would recommend you to see in order to inspire. I don't see that as a clear signal from the sector with a clear application on healthcare yet, but that's inspiring. And from our perspective, I would say from the Novartis view on how to reimagine medicine, I would recommend you all the tracking with KPIs, digital health, prompts solutions, because we think this is going to revolutionize the way that we see medicine. This is going to revolutionize the way we pay providers from the healthcare system. And we really envision a population-centered healthcare system where the administration seeks for the results, for the value that we provide, maybe more thinking on a beyond the pill approach than just on a pill purchasing. And there are several good initiatives, some of them with real applications in huge hospitals that could lead us into the next step, which could be not purchasing volume of healthcare, the quantity of services that we provide to the citizens, but paying for the results that they obtain and measuring those results by knowing which clinical outcomes and experiences they have in an easier way than we are used to. So it's not just reporting with an app, but also how to extract this data from the citizens in order to give them more value and change the way we deliver, plan, and also pay for the healthcare services in our country.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point with regard to outcomes. I think digital health, digital medicine, and digital therapeutic solutions can really help democratize medicine and lessen the burden on health systems in a meaningful way. Because, for example, auxiliary care, whether it's physical therapy or pain management or even psychiatric management, can be delivered via a digital solution or service, and then it allows for patients not to have to wait 6 months to get their care with potentially the same outcomes.
And the thing is that this is a change that is already happening, how the patient journey is being digitalized in several hospitals or primary healthcare centers all over. And well, when you see the rich environment that we have for startups, there are the ones that really have the cases and that are being reimbursed, are the ones working in the patient journey. And I feel that as an inspiring message from startups back to the sector, telling us that this is really happening and we need to help them deliver.
So the title of our talk are Digital Health Trends in Pharma. I'd like to dig in a little bit on what some of the limitations have been in our experiences with working with startups, but then end on a much more positive note and what some of the successes have been as well. We talked about some things like compliance and regulation, which always sends chills up pharma's spine. How to contract differently, how to procurement systems are differently. I think, pharma sales cycles can be 18 to 24 months, which might be the lifetime of a startup. So, apart from those, are there other limitations for pharma and startups to collaborate?
Well, in my view, there's one huge that you were already mentioning, and it's the internal processes. And that's something that it's quite old, and it's the same in other industries, and other industries are maybe more advanced on that process, but changing the mindset in our companies and the eternal dichotomy of big corpo working with a startup. But it is true that if you have a really long process of procurement and you ask for tons of papers and tons of figures for a startup, that it's not going to work, no? So we need to change that mindset and find new and innovative ways of partnering with startups and being more flexible. For me, that's one of the biggest barriers that we can find.
Since we saw that most of the audience is from pharma, I'm sure they fully understand what we mean. But I recall an article that I read from Harvard, and I'm recalling it from just my mind, so I'm not going to be super exact. But it was speaking about how in companies we have product people, so people who are more innovative, who tend to think about more on the ideas, on what's the value, and then more process people, so that tend to think on the no's, on the risk, on the cons. And when companies are smaller, they tend to have a balance of more product innovative people than process, which I think is really what startups have. And while we grow as companies and big pharmas, we tend to have more layers and layers of hierarchy and processes. So sometimes, even though we don't want to, we tend to kill those ideas, the value that it might have for a patient, because those processes and all the people with process mindset that we have. And I think when you put a startup into, to work for a few days within a pharma company, you feel that. You feel that two cultures going in and struggling a bit. And for us, it's what Cesar was mentioning before. We need to get more on the startup part of. And to share a good example or a case that we are proud of in Angelini Pharma is that we've been working for 1 year and a half, almost 2, in bringing agility in our organization and to really work as if we were a startup, in squads, in multidisciplinary teams, with weekly sprints, and that to bring in the super regulatory sector where the sales rhythm goes in another path. I think it's been a challenge, but you feel it now, like the rhythm in which things get smoothly and get happening, it's way more easier and quicker than it used to be in the past. So I think that is our challenge, to collaborate with startups.
That's great, thanks.
So I see a huge challenge in understanding the healthcare system needs and the healthcare system processes to adopt innovation from startups. I think there is a huge gap over there. And also on how to pivot solutions. So we are used to do tender processes, both in the public sector and in the pharma industry. So we need to select which is the best provider from the beginning. And this is not how startups work. We need to be able to pivot test and not to marry a solution before we know it works. And this is also, truly speaking, for startups, it's a need. I mean, they don't want to engage with a pharma. They don't want to sign exclusivity contracts if they don't know that they're going to provide what you're looking for. So we need a bit of change in the way we understand startups as providers or co-developers, and also understand more the healthcare system in order to serve to clients what they are really looking for.
No, I agree with that. I think the ability to pivot both on the startup side and on the pharma side is key. I'll kick off with what I think was a successful collaboration. We, back when I was at Admiral, we collaborated with Happify Health to provide a digital therapeutic solution for patients with psoriasis. So basically this was an app that would help them manage their depression and anxiety, because about 40 to 50% of patients with severe disease have anxiety and depression. And we launched it in 3 countries last year. And the differences in the regulatory requirements, compliance requirements, but also the needs of the patients in all of those countries were completely different. And the way those teams decided to promote the solution was also different. So that complete flexibility on the side, luckily of our teams, but also on their side, was really helpful.
Well, absolutely. And talking about successes, in our case, for example, we worked with a startup that is actually here, big, to launch big asthma. Working closely with the Federation of Respiratory Patients, we identified that there were some uncontrolled patients with asthma, so we launched this app with a chatbot based on artificial intelligence to basically try to raise awareness among patients about the state of their illness and how they could be addressing in a better way this illness. No? So, and I think that this really worked very well and is working very well, so that's a case that we are very proud of. Yeah.
That's great.
Sounds interesting.
So we have only a few minutes left. Any closing thoughts before I wrap up?
We need to work together, I'd say. Always putting the patient at the center, because that's what we work for, ultimately. But to keep doing what Barcelona Health Hub is doing, to put us together and to make this process smoother as much as we can.
From our side, we really believe that science and technology together, they really make a difference on the impact that we can have on patients' lives. So basically, this is the opportunity we have to make that a reality. It's challenging, it is, we already talked about it, but it's a huge opportunity and it's a really good thing to do.
So I would close with a bit of storytelling. I see the healthcare ecosystem as a kind of a pumping heart, like beating heart. So there are explosions or implosions. And Mobile World Congress is an implosion. So we are a bit together, closer than we are usually when the heart is working. So we are all together here today for a reason. So I would recommend you to mingle with other pharmas, with the startups, with the healthcare system. I see people from Valdebron, from Telefonica, from Timti, from EIT Health, from different pharmas. Please go and talk with people you don't know, because you will discover needs that you don't know. And we can make, those beats of our heart as an ecosystem stronger if we really talk to each other.
I love that. I think it's clear that we'll need to collaborate. We'll need to have science-based, evidence-based solutions to help patients. But we always need as well to have our problem and the right solution in place to make it a success. So I encourage all of you, as Cesar said, to interact with each other, to learn from each other. But I think, eyes wide open on both sides always leads to the most successful collaboration. So thank you for listening and for your time, and we look forward to seeing you around the event.